Welcome to The Big Unlock, where we discuss data, analytics, and emerging technologies in healthcare. Here's some of the most innovative thinkers in healthcare information technology talk about the digital transformation of healthcare and how they are driving change in their organizations.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to my podcast, The Big Unlock. And it's my privilege and honor today to have as my special guest today, Dr. Patrick James, Chief Clinical Officer of Quest Diagnostics. Dr. James, welcome.
Eddie, it's my pleasure. Thank you.
You're very welcome. You're very welcome. So, Dr. James, you're going to spend maybe another 15, 20 minutes or so talking mostly about a very provocatively titled report that Quest Diagnostics is publishing, which is based on a survey that you did. And the title of the report is Stalled Progress on the Path to Value-Based Care. Now, obviously, it looks like you had some surprises in the survey. Do you want to start by telling us what the key takeaways were and what surprised you and what led to that provocative title?
Patty, I would be delighted to do so. So, Patty, as I believe you're aware, this is the third annual survey where we've been canvassing opinions from physicians, primary care physicians, several hundred, and also a large number of health plan executives at the director level or above. So we've been watching the voice of the customer, if you will, the people we're working with, both physicians and health plan executives, get their perceptions of, how is the movement going? Is the migration accelerating or perhaps not as much as we had expected several years ago? And also understand what they're viewing as both challenges to adopting this mode of dealing with the changing healthcare landscape. So this is the third installment. I think early on we felt that the movement was progressing. With the current study, I think we're getting some good data showing that there's less optimism about this movement, that we're both physicians and health plan executives feel that it's not moving at the speed we had imagined, that we're still very much in a fee-for-service environment. And this year's study shows less optimism of catalyzing that movement going forward.
Right. Did you see any nuances in the responses? As obviously, several hundred respondents, so I imagine they cover a fairly broad spectrum from among the clinician community and also in the health plan community. Did you see any nuances in terms of certain types of organizations, maybe the larger ones being more receptive to value-based care, or otherwise? Were there any subtexts, so to speak, in the findings, in the broad findings?
Patty, I would say so. In the broad text of this, in surveying the physicians and these executives, over 2/3, 67%, believe that we are very much in a fee-for-service environment, as opposed to a value-based system. About 27% had that perception, and the fee-for-service was actually up 4% over last year, and the group that felt we were in value-based care system actually dropped by 2%. So that was surprising. We didn't specifically break out, whether the plans that are feeling maybe this stalling are the larger or perhaps regional or smaller regional plans. We do work with a number of health plans, right? I engage with our health plan colleagues on a daily basis, and many of the larger national plans have moved forward with various value-based arrangements, some with their ACO partners. It does seem like our discussions about these kinds of initiatives are not as frequent or energized, perhaps, as they were maybe a year or two ago.
Right, right. Now, I know your survey doesn't specifically cover this, but do you have, from your own experience, an estimate of how much of the healthcare payment dollars are flowing through a value-based care arrangement as opposed to a fee-for-service arrangement? Would you say it's...
Yeah, Paddy, I don't have current information. I know most of well, first of all, CMS came out with some very bold goals a few years ago in terms of moving away from fee-for-service towards more quality-based risk sharing sort of arrangements. On the commercial health plan side, most of the nationals have also come out with, going back 3 years or so, 2 or 3 years, fairly aggressive movements toward those sorts of arrangements. I know our experience as a diagnostic services provider, we've had a number of those discussions. We're still very early, though, in the process in terms of what they might look like and how we might engage the provider segment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I know the CMS had set a goal of 50% of all Medicare payments by 2018. Is it safe to say that goal is not going to be achieved this year?
Penny, I would say that's less likely. I know with the new administration, some of the changes that are ongoing in HHS and CMS, in some of the attempts to try and relieve administrative burden on physicians, whether it's CMS or the American Medical Association, there's a lot of discussion and initiatives trying to cut back on the administrative burden placed on practices, whether it's pre-authorization or trying to document quality measures for MACRA as examples. So I think both CMS and certainly many of the health plans are hearing a lot of pushback around administrative burden. So people are trying to simplify quality measures. There's also an attempt to try and make physicians doing their work, particularly primary care physicians, right, where offices are quite hectic and overburdened. The stresses of trying to deal with some of these many requirements have just become overwhelming. So I think there's a number of things that may be at play in perhaps easing the push towards value-based care in terms of some of the mechanics and management of data becoming easier.
Right, and you mentioned quality metrics, and that clearly seems to be one of the spotlights in the report in terms of the degree of agreement or disagreement about whether these quality metrics are helping, hindering, and whether the tools are even in place. Correct, and there's a lot of commentary around that, and some interesting differences as well as convergences. So if I recall it right in this survey, it seems like health plans are finally coming around to agreeing more with the physicians that the quality metrics tools are not adequate in order to meet the needs of a value-based care system. Did I read that correctly?
Patty, you absolutely did. And it's interesting, I was traveling last week, and on a flight back to my home, I was reading the most recent issue of Modern Healthcare, and they had a summary report of the recent Healthcare Financial Management Association meeting, and actually value-based care was a very dominant theme that permeated the conference. And it was interesting, they came away with a couple of key themes. One is data is king, and we in Quest Diagnostics have realized in recent years, especially under Lydia's leadership, that data is incredibly important, and the tools that we can use to help transform data into knowledge that becomes useful in context and eventually becoming wisdom. We've really put a lot of effort in developing our suite of tools, which we call Quantum, to deal with whether it's an electronic health record system we can put into practices, whether it's some of the analytics we can overlay to help physicians look at gaps in care, closing quality measures. We know that data is very important. It's the coin of the realm, if you will, but many physicians are overwhelmed with data. Actually, many health plans are also overwhelmed with data. So, in our mission to really develop and deliver insights, using our tools to make all the insights that are available in the very rich database that is laboratory study is really a focus. The second thing that came out of the Healthcare Financial Management Association's theme was really the risk has to, the incentives need to be aligned. More downside risk, they state. Incentives are going to be necessary. Third, they talked about a matter of trust. And that's another area we've really tried to develop our value proposition, what we bring to our colleagues, our customers, whether they're physicians or health plans. One of our themes is trusted medical advisors. So we understand this space very well. We understand how to apply tools to this data to enrich it and make it more insightful. So that's something we're really been pushing in our dialogue with health plans, and it seems to be resonating quite well. That the last of the four pillars that the Healthcare Financial Management group came on value-based, they said changing physician preferences. So we're also trying to help give physicians data-driven choices. Can they go to high-quality, low-cost venues to get work done like laboratory studies? So as I was reading that article, and then Lydia and I and Chanel and others had some discussions internally about the study, it just underscored to me how this study really is aligned and in pace with what we're seeing in some major national dialogues.
Very interesting. Going back to the point about the tools that physicians require in order to meet quality metrics. Now, your survey says that health plan executives and physicians now increasingly agree that the tools to succeed under value-based care are lacking. Right? So, Dr. James, I had a question on that. Do you think that is because people are not investing enough in the tools, or is it because the tools themselves aren't available or are mature enough to meet the needs of a value-based care, a quality metric system under value-based care?
Patty, excellent question. In our perspective, it seems to be elements of both. So in the Quest study, the majority of health plan executives, about 57%, believe that physicians do not have the tools to succeed. Many of those tools, of course, relate to data management, really getting the insights. And it was interesting in this year's survey, which was a distinct departure from prior years. Now, many of the health plan executives agree with physicians that they don't have the robust tool set or the necessary data to really drive success in a value-based contracting environment.
Yeah, and I saw too that the question of data and having enough data about patients is coming up as a theme in the responses. I was curious about one thing though. The survey talks very specifically about electronic health record systems and how much of the information within EHR systems is usable in the context of quality metrics program. At the same time, it seems to me that there is a lot of data that is emerging about patients that can potentially provide a physician with a more comprehensive view of the patient. So we talk about genomics data as an example, or wearables. These are just two prominent examples, but there's lots and lots of emerging data sources, social determinants, and so on, that are now being harnessed in order to provide a more complete view of the patients. So this comment, that physicians are making that they don't have enough data about patients seems to be in some ways contradictory to the fact that there's lots and lots of emerging sources of data. So what would one make of that?
Patty, again, I know that you would say, well, gee, that seems to be dichotomy, right? It seems to be a dichotomous series of statements. But I think when we talk about data, the amount of data is overwhelming. There was an article published in Health Affairs this May that said there's 75,000 different genetic tests available to a physician to order, and about 10 new genetic tests, come on the market every day. Well, even if you're an expert in genomic medicine, it's hard to make sense of what exactly is the right test for my patient. So many physicians are becoming overwhelmed, whether it's about choosing genomic tests, whether it's about making sense of the flood of data they're seeing on their patients. So even if physicians are seeing the data through their EHR, getting that data filtered and analyzed appropriately so it becomes actionable is really the key challenge right now, right? So there are some physicians, some practices that are not having as much access to data as they would like. I think when we talk about the tools to deal with that data, that's even a much larger problem. And I know we have a quantum electronic health record, which actually is configured to really help practices deal with requirements, whether it's MACRA or other CMS regulatory environments, to try and make it much easier and intuitive for physicians to deal with this enormous amount of data.
Right. Now, Dr. James, I was looking for some good news in all this, and it seemed to me like there's at least a couple pieces of good news in the survey, and one of them seems to be that all your survey respondents demonstrate a lot of support for technology and technology solutions. So blockchain, advanced analytics. Do you consider that to be a positive sign? And how does that play into eventually accelerating the shift towards value-based care, assuming that that's a desirable shift?
Yes. So, Patty, yes, I think you're absolutely correct. I think the information in our survey really emphasized that both physicians and the health plan executives do see real value in some of these evolving technology. You mentioned blockchain. There's also the FHIR technology, some smart application program. We've all been asking for interoperability between these various EHR systems, right? And we're still not there yet. It's somewhat of a Tower of Babel if a physician's trying to deal with information on his patients in different systems. So some of these new platforms and tools and application programming platforms are really going to accelerate the movement to true interoperability. So we're very excited about that. Lydia and her team, as part of Quest, have been at the forefront of a collaborative with blockchain. We call that Blockchain Alliance. We think that's going to really help from both a security standpoint, but also from an access and data retrieval standpoint. So that technology, it's interesting, which really evolved from the cryptocurrencies, looks to have significant applications in healthcare. So that is something we are very excited about.
Yeah, and I did speak with Lydia on this in one of my earlier podcasts about the collaboration that you've launched with Optum and Humana and a couple of others. So that was exciting, and that was focused on provider data management in particular, if I recall it, as the problem that is being addressed through the blockchain pilot. And I'm really interested to hear more about it as and when the results become available in terms of the benefits that you get out of it.
Great.
Coming back to the whole question around value-based care, and one of the things that I do as part of my work with health systems and others is really look at digital transformation. There is this whole shift towards
Yes.
using digital technologies to reimagine processes, reimagine customer experiences, in this case, patient experiences, or even caregiver experiences. And that's a big focus and thrust for many health systems today. There's a couple of things that I wanted to run past you. In your survey, there was an interesting observation that the doctors value patient engagement, but they don't necessarily believe in consumerism. I scratched my head a little bit on that. Just couldn't quite fathom what that meant. But at the same time, it seemed to me like with the support for all the emerging technologies and so on and so forth, uh, and the value that's being placed on improved patient engagement, it seems like there is definitely a desire towards digitally reimagining and transforming the experiences for improved patient engagement and by extension improving the lives of caregivers, whether it's to reduce workload or reduce burnout or whatever. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Patty, one of the results of the Quest study that really caught me by surprise, because I deal with these issues daily. Most of the results really reinforced what I'm seeing. The results on consumerism, the fact that there was a 20 percentage point gap between how physicians and health plan executives, whether putting more emphasis on a consumer-based approach to healthcare will help advance value-based care. 75% of the executives said yes versus 55% of the physicians. I was really struck by that because, everything we're doing as a company is trying to get to that consumer, get to where they're going, how they live their lives, whether it's a partnership with Walmart or Safeway where they shop, digital enablement, apps they can use. It's interesting. We have about 45,000 employees, Patty, and those employees have several thousand dependents that are part of our self-insured health plan. And in recent years, the medical team have been leading a change in how we approach those individuals, our employees, our consumers. And we've been using many of these tools. We've been eating our own cooking, if you will, to really push digital empowerment, really make sure that our employees have data, information, and tools to make good decisions. And it's really made a difference both in outcomes, both financial and clinical. So I know our medical teams and most of the physicians I deal with, in my travels, absolutely underscore the consumerism that's growing ever more important. So I was really surprised to see that gap. I would imagine next year or the next 2 years, that gap is going to close dramatically.
Right. That's really encouraging. One thing that we have to also acknowledge and consider is the role of the regulatory authorities, right? CMS in particular, and
Yeah.
CMS has been series of announcements. I think they made some significant announcements very recently about reimbursements, virtual care, and so on. What is your view on some of the more recent announcements that have come out from the CMS?
Pat, it's interesting. We track their announcements not only on some of the value-based models, that they're trying to get the physicians across the country to adapt, but also how they're really walking the talk, if you will, in regulatory activity. So, we talked about genomic testing recently. There has been a number of discussions to accelerate the adoption, get both the FDA and CMS involved in making determinations on, what genetic tests should be covered. So we are seeing some movement there, some acceleration of the process. We're looking at some of their pronouncements to ease data submission, to make that a little bit easier, less cumbersome to deal with. And on the quality initiatives, we've not heard anything formally from CS that hasn't been announced, but it seems like as we talk to the Medicare administrative contractors and others who work very closely with CMS, I think there are changes afoot to speed the responsiveness. We talked about consumerism. It seems like CMS and the FDA are also getting more consumer-centric and trying to speed up technologies, applications, models of care that'll make easier for providers, physicians to take care of their patients, do it with less administrative burden, and also experience the rewards that come with that.
Right. That's excellent. So I know we're running out of time here. I had just one last question for you, Dr. James. If, in the light of all of the findings from the survey, you had to pick an alternate title to the report, something that focuses on, positive development that really, gives us hope in terms of, a potential acceleration of the shift towards value-based care, what would you say is your takeaway from your survey?
Well, Paddy, I think, the stalled progress on the path, I think is adequate, but I would add, there are I think the support for technology to better deal with data and make that data more available so it really becomes knowledge physicians can make actionable. And also, I think the support for some of the newer technology tools, whether it's the FHIR platform or blockchain technology. And then finally, consumerism will continue to drive many of these things. And it's likely to be another catalyst to get value-based care moving again.
Fantastic. Well, Dr. James, as always, a pleasure speaking with you, and thank you so much for your time. I look forward to speaking with you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Take care.
All right. Bye now.
We hope you enjoyed this podcast. Subscribe to our podcast series at www.thebigunlock.com and write to us at info@thebigunlock.com.